Hey guys, happy Wednesday. I'm just reminding you about the Apply Texas dual credit deadline this Friday. And then, not to mention, I won't be on Zoom on Thursday, Friday, or Monday because I'm moving. So you need to make sure that you complete your attendance questions for those days. I will be taking attendance that next morning for the day before. So you have to make sure that it's completed by 11:59 p.m. Excuse me. Also, I will be available via email, and if you are signed up for a remind, you can text me, and I'll be able to. I'll have my phone, so I'll text faster than I'll email. But I'm here for you should you need anything. I want to review your questions for these discussion boards before we get into too much with Macbeth. So, in yesterday's discussion board, I saw a lot of improvement with regard to looking at these internal and external factors on a more conceptual lens rather than looking at just character behaviors. We have to look at what influences those behaviors and their patterns, okay, throughout any kind of story. So I'm going to use Ceci's here as an example, and I'm going to talk about Ariana's really quick from my first period. And remember, these are public for everybody to see once you've posted them because everybody should be able to use, each other's help when looking at how to complete these discussion questions. So Ceci talked about external factors, and remember, those are things that, our characters cannot control. And she talked about how these external factors are how women are viewed and treated during this time. She gives a little bit of commentary there. She talks about this idea of being powerless or being thought of as less than, talking about the time period and these social expectations of the time period, which forces her to become manipulative. So that was a beautiful example of how to take this factor and to show how her decisions have been influenced and the greater consequence or result of those decisions. Then she goes forth to talk a little bit about her internal factors, and she's talking about her helplessness translating into exerting power by manipulating Macbeth. And so, again, her ambition and her desire to prove that she is not helpless due to her gender is something that motivates her. So, on the outside, there are certain expectations, but she defies them internally through her manipulation through Macbeth. And so, that would be something that we would look at, right? How certain societal and gender expectations influence our decisions on the inside in terms of being defiant or compliant. Ariana's talked about her relationship in terms of her internal factors, and we definitely see her relationship thrive, but their relationship at that period was different than ours would be now, right? At that point, did they marry for love or did they marry for, convenience or uniting certain lands, or was it arranged? Was there a certain agreement? And so marriages at that point were more agreements than they were love. And so, however, their marriage meant Lady Macbeth's livelihood. And so at this point, there are a lot of different factors internally, right? Like her own ambition and her own safety, and her agreement with her husband rather than necessarily loving him. And she does mention that here in this last sentence. By doing so, Lady Macbeth would benefit in taking, rather than earning, because her title wasn't necessarily earned, as the title of queen. An external factor that she mentions is, of course, the social status and position. She talks a little bit about the feminist lens and having a certain role in society. Those can also be different things in terms of social expectations rather than always tied to gender, however you want to talk about it. But I think if you're not really discussing the purpose of gender or how in that time period it could have affected situations, then you might be missing a really important opportunity with Lady Macbeth's character. Okay, so for today, when we talk about Macbeth's character, think about those internal and external factors that he can and cannot control. Think about the societal expectations. Think about, what power does, especially when it's unchecked. Stuff like that, okay? So in scene 5, it's really short. It's about a page and a half, and this is where we meet Hecate. And those of you guys who were with us when we did mythology last year will remember that Hecate is the goddess of witchcraft and magic. And so one other thing to think about, as we could see that Shakespeare's pulling a little bit from Greek mythology, is this idea of hubris. And we talked about this with Antigone last year. with Creon, and we also talked about it with the Iliad, right? With hubris of Paris or Achilles or whatever. So ultimately, Hecate is mad. She is the boss witch, and she was not consulted. And at this point, I think she references Macbeth as a wayward son, which is pretty awesome because that essentially means he's a spoiled brat. He's lost. He has no direction, and he's waiting for everybody to tell him what to do rather than to seize ambition for himself and to make decisions for himself. Ultimately, she promises that she will make something horrible happen, that they are to bring Macbeth, to the edge of hell, so that way he can see his destiny. And so, obviously, this is the plot of his demise. We know in Shakespeare, somebody always dies by either suicide or by stabbing or by poison. So, it's coming. There's already been a stabbing. So, I guess at this point, it could be maybe a suicide or a poisoning. We'll see. So the other thing I wanted to emphasize is the writing is different. This one I think is a little bit easier to read, the Shakespearean version of it, because it's written in couplets. And so some people suggest that maybe, either this scene was added later or this wasn't Shakespeare's original work. I would argue that it is Shakespeare's original work. We can see it in his sonnets, but it's also a goddess, right? And there's a play into the supernatural. So there might be a reason for that. The witches do speak in riddles and rhymes at the beginning of the play, so it would make sense that Hecate would be, the boss in terms of the writing of her dialogue as well as her character. So for today's question on your discussion board, you're going to talk a little bit about Macbeth and the internal and external factors that motivate his actions. And so one of the things that you want to think about is situationally, if you're going to talk about ambition, what does ambition do to people and how is that resulting in his decisions? So you want to focus on the topic or the concept or the situation and then give evidence or proof as to how Macbeth embodies that idea. So if you want to talk a little bit about the pressure of societal expectations, especially in the social classes, how is that seen? If you want to talk about ambition and how it can go, either or when we allow people to manipulate us or not, that could be one thing. If you want to talk about power and power dynamics and how they affect relationships, or when power is unchecked, those are all really good areas to take it. And then you go to Macbeth's character. So you'll be able to see in some people's questions that they've done, look at yesterday's. I believe, especially when I looked at the two that I just showed you, they start with a concept or a situation and then they go into the character. So try that today, especially with Macbeth's character. And tomorrow be expected to make a decision on maybe which of these three characters you might want to take for your research projects as we get into that a little bit further in detail next week. Okay? All right, guys, I'll see you guys back on Zoom next Tuesday, and have a great Wednesday. Take care.